When I was young enough to still be in a crib, my room and my parents' room were mirror images separated by a wall. When I got older, I moved upstairs and the wall was knocked down to make a true master bedroom. My dress clothes were stored in the closet in what had been my room. For some reason, every time I used to go in there looking for something, my heart would start racing and I would get really scared for no real reason and run out of there as quickly as I could. When I tried to think and figure out what made me feel this way, I would get this image in my head of being in the dark, staring at the closet, and fire dancing around the room. One time, my mom noticed how anxious I was coming out of her room and asked me what was wrong. When I told her, the color ran from her face and she asked me, "You remember?" I didn't know what she was talking about, so she explained. While I was still in the crib, I used to wake my parents crying just about every night, telling them that there was a man in the closet and he wanted us to leave. After this had been going on for weeks and weeks, she started asking me questions about him. When she asked me who the man was, I told her, "Bill." That freaked her the fuck out. Before we moved in, the house had belonged to her great-uncle Bill. When he was elderly, he had a live-in assistant who it turns out was actually a burglar who was robbing the houses in the neighborhood. I guess Bill started to figure it out because eventually the guy tied him to the bed, robbed the house, and set the house on fire before running out. He eventually got caught, but Bill burned to death. After learning the name, my mom said she basically said out loud, "Uncle Bill, this is my mom. We live here now. This is my son, Duke Van Dandel, and you're scaring him. We're going to take good care of your house, so please leave us be." After that, I slept through the night with no problem, and that was the last we heard of the man in the closet.
I grew up in a one-room schoolhouse. My great-aunt's husband's family had owned the whole hillside, a massive farm, and what became my house had been grain storage and then the schoolhouse. It shows up on a map in 1844. I haven't been able to track it back beyond that. Anyway, when it was a school, one night a young pupil tried to break in, probably part of a bet or a dare from his friends, and the window he'd pried open came down on his neck and broke it instantly. Many moons later, on my 17th birthday, I had 5 or 6 girls over for a party, and we got out the Ouija board. We immediately got a barrage of messages. I remember we had to grab a notebook because we couldn't keep up with the letters. The board told us a story about a 12-year-old boy, and then said that the boy had always watched out for me because my smile reminded me of his sister Gertie's smile. The board asked me to go into the library. It's just a walk-in closet where we keep too many books, nothing fancy, and asked me to open the window. I walked into the library and immediately got so scared I had to run back out. I researched my house for a school project soon after because I wanted details. The boy had died at the age of 12, and his sister's name was Gertrude. Every time I grab a book, I apologize for not opening the window. But also, I'm really kind of mad at the boy ghost if he's real, because he said he watched out for me, but my mom was a mean drunk, and her pedophile boyfriend lived with us for 7 years. So, honestly, I'm not entirely sure how much I really believe in any of it, but I can't help but apologize to the boy in the library.
One Sunday morning, I was in my kitchen, having a cup of tea with my wife. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw what I thought was my 3-year-old daughter walk out of the front room and into the entrance hall. I went to see what she was doing, and when I got there, there was no one there. I walked back into the kitchen and said to my wife something along the lines of, "I'm bloody seeing things. I could have sworn I saw Amelia walking to the front door, but when I got there, she was nowhere to be seen." My wife was all like, "You're joking. The same thing happened to me and my mom just the other day." She explained how the same thing happened to them in the exact same spot, with the mysterious girl taking the exact same route. In fact, so convinced were they that they had seen our daughter that they crept into the entrance hall after her to make her jump, but there was no one there. It didn't end there, though. A few months later, we saw a post on a local Facebook page saying, "I had a lovely childhood growing up in our address. I'd be really keen to speak to whoever lives there now, particularly to see if they have ever experienced any paranormal goings-on." I direct messaged the poster and asked if she had ever seen anything untoward, without giving any indication of what we had experienced. Lo and behold, her and her sister used to see a little blonde Victorian girl in a white nightie standing outside their bedroom doors or walking through the house. She related how initially they would think it was the other sister and would go to investigate and find no one there. I am a very cynical person by nature and did not previously believe in the paranormal, but I have no explanation for the above.
When I was 7 or 8 years old, I was at my grandmother's house for Christmas and was playing hide and seek with some of my cousins. For context, the house was big, worn-down Victorian house that had been moved from its original location to the plot of land my grandmother owned. It was very cold and drafty, especially in certain rooms. The upstairs where we were playing consisted of 4 bedrooms, 3 of which opened to a large landing, one of which was down a longish hall. Most of us, along with our immediate families, were staying the night, but for some reason, no one ever stayed in that 4th room. As a child, I always thought it was my grandfather's room. He died about 10 years prior to my birth, but in hindsight, I'm not sure why. As far as I know, that wasn't true, and certainly no one ever told me it was. Anyway, it was around 8 p.m. and my turn to count, and of course the person counting went into the separate room to do so. I sat on the bed, closed my eyes, and counted to 20. When I opened my eyes, it was light out. Morning. I'd closed my eyes at night, counted to 20, and somehow 12 hours had passed. Of course, the immediate thought is that maybe I just fell asleep. I'll refute that with 3 points. First, why didn't my cousins come get me when I failed to seek them? Second, it was cold in that house. We would sleep multiple people to a bed under several blankets, at least one of which was usually electric. I can't imagine sleeping through the night in that kind of cold without some kind of covering. And third, there's no way my parents wouldn't have bothered to come find me before they went to sleep, and when they did find me, they wouldn't have left me there, especially without a blanket. I can't tell you what happened. Maybe I had some sort of strange memory lapse that just happened to begin and end in the same location. Maybe the simulation lagged. Maybe I really did skip 12 hours. All I can say for sure is that something happened that night, and I've never been able to explain it.
As part of a family trip when I was about 8 years old, we stayed at the Columbia City Hotel in California. The place is a Gold Rush hotel, which is purported to be haunted, but it was for the general Gold Rush history that we were staying there. I remember hearing some sort of tour describing the ghostly activity to do with the miners and gold prospectors, but I wasn't a part of the tour and was really just hanging out waiting for my parents to finish checking in. That night when we went to sleep, I had pretty much forgotten that the place was supposedly haunted. Sometime in the early morning, I awoke crying after a nightmare, which wasn't uncommon. Neither were night terrors, and I remember still being in the state between alert and asleep. While lying in my bed, I could faintly hear a soft woman's humming, which sounded like a lullaby, almost like what my mom might do. But I also noticed that it sounded very close when my parents were asleep on the other side of the room. I wasn't afraid, even when I heard a calming and soft, "Shh, go back to sleep, baby." Still sleepy, I did actually drift off back to sleep. The next day when I was chalking it up to a dream, I heard the tour again, talking about a young woman who in the Gold Rush era had stayed in our room. Apparently her child had died in infancy there, and she grieved it something fierce, enough that they claimed people still heard the infant's cries and her singing. I know I hadn't heard this part of the tour the day before, and hearing it after my night convinced me what I had dealt with wasn't a dream.
I've got a few from my grandparents' ranch. The original house was built in the early 1800s, and the graveyard from the original family is still there. When my family first bought the property, the previous owners were still living there for a few weeks until they moved. My grandpa was out riding around and saw a guy from a distance, dressed in slacks and a white shirt/suspenders. My grandpa assumed it was the previous owner, so he drove up to say hi. As he got closer, the guy walked behind a bush and seemingly disappeared into thin air. He told the previous owner about it, and he asked, was he wearing a white shirt and suspenders? Apparently, they've seen him a lot wandering around in the evening, almost always where my grandpa saw him too. A few months later, when I first visited, me and my cousin were playing PS2 in the living room around midnight. There was a huge sliding glass door facing the backyard and barn. I noticed 2 people walking around outside with what looks like rifles and Civil War caps. It looked like they were marching almost. Eventually, they kept going into the darkness, while me and my cousin were shitting ourselves in silence. Nothing really happened for the next few years besides footsteps and weird feelings. I would hear super loud footsteps at night and assume it's someone walking into the kitchen. I got creeped out, so if someone else was awake, I would take that opportunity to go get food. When I realized no one else was awake, I ran back into my room. Fast forward to when I lived there during college. I had my own little cabin down the road, and it was really creepy, but cool. One night, I had a friend over, and we were up pretty late. We heard some footsteps on the gravel outside, and then louder footsteps on the front porch. Then I saw a silhouette of someone through the window walking around.
I jumped up to go make sure it wasn't some meth head, but when I walked out front, there was nobody there. And it's an open area, so there would be no place for anyone to run or hide. Safe to say we didn't get any sleep that night. That's about all the super creepy stories I have, but plenty of your typical paranormal things have happened over the years. This was on the Devil's Backbone in Texas, by the way. If you know the stories of that area, you know it's a creepy-ass place. TLDR, my family's ranch is either haunted or Civil War larbers keep fucking with us.